Hello, my name is Seth Allen, Online Instruction Librarian for King University Libraries. In this tutorial, I want to discuss the information cycle and the distinction between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. So what is the information cycle? It's the progression of an idea, topic, or event across time as it appears in information sources. Take a moment and think about all the formats in which information is shared. Books, websites, articles, podcasts, all of these are potential information sources that document facts, events, ideas. The first time that an event or an idea is documented, it's called a primary source. The purpose of primary sources is to document what's happened, and as such, there really isn't a lot of time for analysis. Secondary sources comment or analyze an event or idea, and they often take place well after the event has taken place. So let's take a historical event, and maybe a primary source would be an eyewitness account of the event, or news footage if it's a more recent event. A secondary source might be a book that was published on the event 20 years after the fact, where there's time to actually analyze the event. And finally, we have tertiary sources. And the purpose is to give an overview of an event. There's a lot of information, but it's not very in-depth. And tertiary sources also compile primary and secondary sources. So it may be a place to get started, and you'll be able to find primary and secondary sources on a topic. While this seems very abstract, let's think about a recent event, 9/11, and we can analyze the information cycle. As you see in the arrows here, you see the information cycle as it unfolds from primary to secondary to tertiary sources. A good example of a primary source would be an article published on the day of the event, and I have a newspaper article from the New York Times published on 9/11/2001, and it reports what happened and includes eyewitness testimonies of people who were on the streets of New York. There's been a lot of articles written about 9/11, but in order to be a primary source, it would need to take place the day of or about the day after to be considered a primary source. A good example of a secondary source would be the 9/11 report. The 9/11 report was a government commission report that occurred about 3 years after 9/11. The causes of 9/11 and the potential threats to the United States were examined in this book. Because this book comments or critiques or analyzes an event or an idea, in this case 9/11, it's considered a secondary source. And we can also see that it was published 3 years after the actual event took place. And finally, we have tertiary sources, and a good example here is a Wikipedia page. Generally speaking, Wikipedia is a tertiary source because it functions like a dictionary or encyclopedia. You have a lot of citations here to primary and secondary sources. And while the page is very short, it covers a lot of information about the event, but it gives you just a general snapshot or overview. We can further break down secondary sources by popular or scholarly sources. So there are realms of discourse or realms of discussion that are considered academic and some that are considered popular. So an example of popular discourse would be maybe a blog about a particular topic, like 9/11. Maybe what you see on the news. Scholars in various fields also discuss information. They share ideas. They critique and comment on each other's ideas in what's called scholarly discourse. So these are generally sources that you don't find just Googling on the internet, but it's usually articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals. So whenever you hear peer-reviewed, you want to think scholarly. And this is where scholars analyze an event and they discuss the event in very specialized terminology. I have an example here of an article from a peer-reviewed journal, and these are available through our library databases. And this is about civil liberties. Right? You'll notice in this article, and I'm going to click on PDF full text to actually open it up. Unlike a news article that you would read in a newspaper or Time or Newsweek, this one has very little charts or pictures. It's very heavy with citations. It's written for scholars by scholars. Right? So we can call this a scholarly or peer-reviewed source. Now, contrast that to a popular source like the Looming Tower. The Looming Tower was a bestseller in 2007, and it is written in language that laymen can understand. You don't have to have a legal or a security background to be able to understand the book. And like I said earlier, another example of a popular source may be a news broadcast or a blog post. And finally, we have tertiary sources. In this case, the 9/11 Encyclopedia, which was actually a specialized encyclopedia made with general overviews of people involved in 9/11 and particular events that happened on that day. Primary, secondary, and tertiary sources can vary by discipline. You may want to take a look at this chart or the PowerPoint that I'll make available afterwards so that you'll be able to see what are primary, secondary, and tertiary sources in each discipline. A good example is in, let's say you're taking a history class on the Civil War. The diary of a Civil War soldier would be an example of a primary source because it's an eyewitness account of what actually happened. A book written about the Civil War that was written, let's say, in the past 100 years would be an example of a secondary source because the book doesn't actually document what happened, but it comments or critiques on the Civil War. A tertiary source would be, again, a Wikipedia page or maybe a list of battle sites that you find. Maybe you have a map of Confederate battle sites. That would be considered a tertiary source. So how does all this relate to the research process? Well, when you do research, you want to start backwards. You want to start with tertiary sources and then go to primary sources. So you would go to tertiary sources like a Wikipedia page to get a general overview. But you want to make sure that you're not citing tertiary sources like Wikipedia or an encyclopedia or dictionary in your paper. The reason being is it's not in depth enough to be included in a paper. You generally use tertiary sources to be able to find more information. So that's where you would start doing research. You can use secondary sources to be able to get a greater sense of an idea, or if you're doing a very in-depth research, let's say you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, there's a good chance that you're going to have to actually analyze primary sources for a research project. So that's just a brief overview of the information cycle. So keep in mind that there are primary, secondary, and tertiary sources that appear in sequence, and that these sources can be either scholarly or they can be popular sources. Keep in mind as well that primary, secondary, and tertiary sources vary by discipline, and that when you do research, you want to use tertiary sources and work backwards. So I hope this helps you in understanding information cycle. Thanks for watching.